Khorloogiin Choibalsan was the communist leader of the Mongolian People's Republic and Marshal of the Mongolian Armed Forces from the 1930s until his death in 1952. His rule marked the first and last time in modern Mongolian history that a single individual amassed complete political power, often referred to as the Stalin of Mongolia. Choibalsan oversaw violent Soviet-ordered purges in the late 1930s that resulted in the deaths of an estimated 30,000 to 35,000 Mongolians. Most of the victims were Buddhist clergy, intelligentsia, political dissidents, ethnic Buryats and Kazakhs, and other enemies of the revolution. His intense persecution of Mongolia's Buddhists brought about the near-complete extinction in the country. Although Choibalsan's devotion to Joseph Stalin helped preserve his country's fledgling independence during the early years of the Mongolian People's Republic, it also turned Mongolia into the first satellite state of the Soviet Union. Throughout his rule, Mongolia's economic, political, and military ties to the USSR deepened, infrastructure and literacy rates improved, and international recognition of Mongolia's independence expanded, especially after World War II. Early life. Choibalsan was born on February 8, 1895 in Choibalsan, near present-day Choibalsan, Dornod Province. He was the youngest of 4 children born to a poor unmarried herdswoman named Khorloogiin. His father was likely a Mongol from Inner Mongolia called Jamsu, but Choibalsan claimed to be unaware of his identity. Named Jugar at birth, he assumed the religious name Choibalsan at age 13 after entering the local Buddhist monastery of Sanbasian Kure, where he trained to be a amassed monk. 5 years later he fled to Kure with another novice where he worked odd jobs, in part to prevent him from being returned to the monastery. A sympathetic Buryat teacher named Nikolai Danchanov had him enrolled in the Russian consulate's Russian-Mongolian translator school. A year later he was sent on at public expense to study at a gymnasium in Irkutsk, Russia from 1914 to 1917. Outer Mongolian Revolution of 1921. Formation of the Mongolian People's Party. Choibalsan and fellow Mongolian students in Russia were called back to Kure by the Bogd Khan government following the 1917 October Revolution. Exposed to Bolshevism while living among Irkutsk's radicalized student population, Choibalsan joined the revolutionary Consular Khorloogiin group, heavily influenced by Bolshevist philosophy and established to resist the Chinese occupation of Outer Mongolia after 1919. Original members of the group also included Damban Chagda Javandara Zav and Losal. Khorloogiin Badou, the group's leader, was a former teacher and mentor of Choibalsan's at the Russian-Mongolian School for Translators. With his serviceable Russian, Choibalsan served as the group's translator with contacts at the Russian consulate. Those contacts later encouraged Khorloogiin to join forces with the more nationalist-oriented resistance group Zuin Kure, which counted Solian Danzan, Dansrabaligian Dogzam, and Damdin Sukbator among its members. On June 25, 1920, the new body adopted the name Mongolian People's Party. In 1924 the party renamed itself the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Party or MPRP after the death of the Bogd Khan and the formal proclamation of the Mongolian People's Republic. Contact with Soviets and the First MPP Congress. In late June 1920, Choibalsan and Danzan embarked for Irkutsk to establish contacts with the Soviets and seek assistance in the struggle for independence. Choibalsan and Sukhbator remained together in Irkutsk for several months, raising awareness of Mongolia's plight and receiving military training. During this period, Sukhbator gradually became a second mentor to Choibalsan, while the group of seven continued the lobbying efforts in Soviet Russia. Forces commanded by the anti-Bolshevik Russian warlord Roman von Ungern-Sternberg invaded Mongolia from the east and ejected occupying Chinese garrisons from Kure in October 1920. No longer faced with directly confronting the Chinese in Mongolia, the Soviets finally threw the backing behind the Mongolian revolutionaries. Choibalsan and Sukhbator relocated to Troitsk to coordinate revolutionary activities and recruit Mongolian fighters. Choibalsan secretly ventured as far as Kure to consult with MPP supporters, enlist fighters, and spirit members of Sukhbator's family back to Troitsk. At a Soviet-organized MPP conference held secretly in Troitsk from March 1 to 3, 1921, Choibalsan was elected a member of the Provisional Revolutionary Government. He was also appointed political commissar of the Mongol-Hovsgol-Siraj, or the Mongolian People's Army, commanded by Sukhbator. Defeat of Ungern-Sternberg. Within days, Sukhbator's Mongolian partisan army defeated the larger but demoralized Chinese garrison that had fled to Kyakhta-Mama-Ichang. Joint Mongol and Red Army forces directly confronted Ungern's troops in a series of battles near Troitsk from late May to mid-June. Choibalsan took command of a Mongolian detachment based in Tariot, in modern-day Arkhangelsk province, and, together with the Russian forces commanded by Petr Efimovich Shatinkin, fought right-guard actions in western Mongolia in support of the main Russian Mongolia advance through modern-day Salinch and Tov provinces. After small skirmishes with Ungern's remaining guard units, the joint Russian-Mongol force entered Kure unchallenged on July 6, 1921. Choibalsan pursued remnants of Ungern's army and was likely on hand at Ungern's capture by Shatinkin on August 22, 1921. Rise to power. After the revolution, Choibalsan remained deputy chief of the Mongolian People's Army while also being elected chairman of the Mongolian Revolutionary Youth League. Despite his credentials as one of the MPP's founding members, he failed to advance beyond second-tier government posts throughout the 1920s. His heavy drinking, womanizing, and violent temperament alienated him from party leaders, and at one point in the early 1930s he was temporarily demoted from being Minister of Foreign Affairs to the role of simple museum director. While he often gravitated towards the leftist faction of the party, he was suspected of being a rightist, in what little mention is made of him in Soviet and Mongolian reports of the era. Choibalsan himself did not include many of his own speeches from this period in his collected works, indicating his role during this period was not a prominent one. It was not until members of the Soviet security apparatus such as Soviet Commissar for Defense Clement Voroshilov took note of Choibalsan's political usefulness in the late 1920s and early 1930s that his career prospects began to improve. Purge of Badou. In late 1921, Choibalsan's MRYL foot soldiers carried out Prime Minister Badou's modernization campaign of forcibly cutting off feudal ornaments from Mongolian clothing. The angry public backlash led to Badou's purge and eventual execution in August 1922, while Choibalsan was stripped of both full party membership and his position as deputy commander of the Mongolian military. Only Sukhbator's intervention saved him from Badou's fate. Choibalsan was sent to a Moscow Russian military academy after Sukhbator's death in 1923, and when he returned to Ulaanbaatar a year later was offered his old mentor's former position as Commander-in-Chief of the People's Revolutionary Troops. He also held positions as a member of the Presidium of the State Great Ural from 1924 to 1928 and as member of the MPRP Central Committee. At the Third Party Congress in 1924, Choibalsan sided with leftist leader Rinching-yan Elbagdorj's left and right-wing factions of the MPRP called for the arrest and execution of moderate party leader Danzan, who was accused of protecting bourgeois interests and engaging in business with Chinese firms. Following Danzan's death, Choibalsan and Rinchino's political influence diminished as the party's right wing, led by Siranotcha and Dambadorj, assumed control and, during a period later referred to as the right opportunism, promoted rightist policies mirroring Lenin's new economic policy in the Soviet Union. The rise of Joseph Stalin and termination of Lenin's new economic policy influenced political developments in the MPR, with the 1928 MPRP 7 Party Congress ushering in the leftist period. Quote, Soviet advisers arranged for Choibalsan to be kicked upstairs to be chairman of the Little Ural, from where, in 1929 and 1930, he supported implementation of Soviet-backed leftist policies of more rapid collectivization, land expropriation, and persecution of the Buddhist Church. At the Eighth Party Congress in 1930, Choibalsan contributed to a ramping up leftist socialist reforms when, again encouraged by Soviet agents, he introduced personally formulated decrees that intensified land confiscation and forced collectivization measures. His appointment in 1931 as Minister of Livestock and Agriculture gave him even greater authority to enforce the policies. Traditional herders were forced off the steppe and into badly managed collective farms, destroying one-third of Mongolian livestock. Over 800 properties belonging to the nobility and the Buddhist Church were confiscated, and over 700 head of mostly noble households were executed. The government's aggressive measures ultimately lead to brutal armed uprisings in Kovsgol, Arkhangai, Ovorkhangai, and Zavkhan provinces in 1932. In reaction, Moscow ordered a temporary curtailment of economic centralization efforts. Comintern agents counted on Choibalsan to be a strong advocate for its new-turn policy to correct the excesses of the left deviation, when it was introduced in an extraordinary plenum of the MPRP Central Committee in June 1932. Later MPR histories would credit Choibalsan with being the first to criticize the leftist period and propose reforms, but these were merely fabrications meant to build up Choibalsan's cult of personality. Hum affair. In the summer of 1934, Choibalsan's name surfaced during interrogations of party members arrested as part of the Hum affair, a manufactured conspiracy in which MPRP General Secretary Jamban Hum and other MPRP elements, particularly Buryat Mongols, were falsely accused of conspiring with Japanese spies. The invasion of neighboring Manchuria by Japanese forces in 1931 had raised fears in Ulaanbaatar and Moscow alike of possible Japanese military expansion into Mongolia and the Soviet Far East. Over 1,500 people were implicated in the purge and 56 were executed. Choibalsan was called to Moscow where he was arrested and interrogated regarding his possible involvement. Within days, however, he was cooperating with the NKVD in the interrogation and torture of fellow Mongolians. Satisfied with his loyalty, Stalin ordered Mongolia's Prime Minister Pelgidian Gendun to appoint Choibalsan as deputy prime minister. Gendun vigorously objected, but to no avail. As relations between Gendun and Stalin soured, Choibalsan's influence with Moscow increased. In 1935, as a public sign of his favor, Stalin gifted Choibalsan 20 gas automobiles which he distributed among Mongolian power players to increase his prestige. Great Terror, Purge of Gendun. In 1936, Choibalsan and Khorloogiin were appointed marshals of the armed forces, while Choibalsan also became head of the newly elevated Ministry of Internal Affairs, 26% of whose staff were NKVD agents, acting under Moscow's directive. Choibalsan then had Gendun purged in March 1936 for sabotaging Mongol-Soviet relations by rejecting Stalin's demand that he eliminate the country's Buddhist clergy. Gendun was removed from his offices of Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, arrested, and sent to Moscow, where he was executed a year later. Anand Amar became Prime Minister in his place. Over the next 3 years, Soviet mentors in the Ministry of Internal Affairs guided Choibalsan in planning and carrying out the Great Terror, under the direction of his Soviet handler Chopyak. Choibalsan had Internal Affairs Committee rules amended in May 1936 to facilitate the detention of high-ranking politicians without first consulting political superiors. Soon thereafter, 23 high-ranking lamas were arrested for participating in their counter-revolutionary center. Following a year-long trial, they were publicly executed in early October 1937. When Mongolia's Procurator General protested the Lama's prosecution, he too was arrested and then shot. Death of Marshal in August 1937. The 36-year-old Marshal, whose popularity Choibalsan had always resented, died under suspicious circumstances, resulting in Choibalsan's promotion to the dual role of sole commander-in-chief of the Mongolian military and Minister of Defense. The following day, Choibalsan, as Interior Minister, issued Order 366, which declared that many in Mongolia had fallen under the influence of Japanese spies and provocateurs. That same month, Stalin, alarmed by Japanese military movements in Manchuria, ordered the stationing of 30,000 Red Army troops in Mongolia and had dispatched a large Soviet delegation to Ulaanbaatar under Soviet Deputy NKVD Commissar Mikhail Frenovsky. Frenovsky was charged with setting in motion the violent purges that he had so effectively carried out in the Soviet Union under NKVD chief Nikolai Yezhov, working through Soviet advisors already embedded within the Ministry of Interior and with a willing Choibalsan providing symbolic cover. Frenovsky built the purge framework from behind the scenes, producing arrest lists and creating an NKVD-style troika to try suspects. The arrest of 65 high-ranking government officials and intelligentsia on the night of September 10, 1937 signaled the launch of the purges in earnest. All were accused of spying for Japan as part of a Gendun plot, and most confessed under intense torture. The first show trial was staged at the Central Theatre from October 18 to 20, 1937. 13 of the 14 persons accused were sentenced to death, in a spasm of violence that lasted nearly 18 months. Choibalsan's troika approved and carried out the execution of over 17,000 counter-revolutionary lamas. Monks that were not executed were forcibly laicized, while 746 of the country's monasteries were liquidated. Thousands more dissident intellectuals, political political and government officials labeled enemies of the revolution, as well as ethnic Buryats and Kazakhs, were also rounded up and killed. 25 persons from top positions in the party and government were executed, 187 from the military leadership, 36 of the 51 members of the Central Committee. Following the Russian model, Choibalsan opened gulags in the countryside to imprison dissidents, while the NKVD effectively managed the purge by staging show trials and carrying out executions. A frequently intoxicated Choibalsan was sometimes present during torture and interrogations of suspected counter-revolutionaries, including old friends and comrades. Choibalsan rubber-stamped NKVD execution orders and at times personally directed executions. He also added names of political enemies to NKVD arrest lists simply to settle old scores. Nevertheless, even when he attempted to spare victims by recommending leniency in certain cases, NKVD officers often overrode his decision. End of the Great Terror. Racked with stress, Choibalsan spent 6 months recuperating and consulting with Voroshilov of Yezhov and Stalin in Moscow and Sochi, while NKVD agents and Interior Ministry officials carried on purge operations from Ulaanbaatar. When he returned to Mongolia, Choibalsan followed Soviet directives and had the highly popular Prime Minister Amar purged. Choibalsan claimed he had helped anti-government plotters, opposed their arrest, and neglected the defense of the borders. He betrayed his own country and was a traitor to the revolution. Quote, after a coordinated propaganda campaign, Amar was arrested on March 7, 1939 and sent to the USSR, where he was later tried by a Soviet troika and executed. With Amar's removal, Choibalsan became Mongolia's uncontested leader, simultaneously holding the office Prime Minister, Minister for Internal Affairs, Minister of War and Commander-in-Chief of the Mongolian Armed Forces. Secured in his position, Choibalsan brought the terror to an end in April 1939 by declaring that the excesses of the purges had been conducted by overzealous party officials while he was away in the USSR, but that he had overseen the arrests of the real criminals. Official blame for the purges fell on the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs Nazan Togtem and his former Soviet handler Kichakov. Later, other henchmen of the purge were arrested and executed, including Lovsan Sherov, Byaskalan, Dashtsevej, and Lovsan Dorj. Dogzam and Losol, the last 2 living members of the original 7 founding members of the MPRP, were also arrested. Dogzam was executed in 1941. Losol died in a Soviet prison before his case came to trial. World War II, 1939–1945. Battle of Kharkhin-Gol. See Battle of Kharkhin-Gol in the spring of 1939. Japanese Kwantung Army military leaders moved to test the resolve of the Soviet and Mongolian militaries to protect disputed territory along Mongolia's southeast border with Japanese-occupied Manchuria. Over the course of 3 battles, a heavily armored Soviet military force commanded by Georgy Zhukov decisively crushed the Japanese advance near the village of Nomonhin. The Mongolian contribution to the Soviet victory was nominal, with just 237 casualties as compared to nearly 8,000 casualties for both the Soviet and Japanese forces. Nevertheless, the victory, which took place close to his birthplace, helped cement Choibalsan's growing cult of personality, which portrayed him as a staunch defender of Mongolian independence against imperialist Japanese aggression. Support for the Soviet Union. Choibalsan proclaimed his country's unwavering support for the Soviet Union after Germany's invasion of the USSR in June 1941. Although Mongolia never officially declared war against Germany and waited until August 1945 to declare war against Japan, as early as 1939, Stalin had pushed Choibalsan to increase Mongolia's livestock population to 200 million as a source of raw materials for the Soviet Union in the event of war in Europe. Throughout the conflict, the MPR's economy was recalibrated to provide material support to the Soviet Union in the form of livestock, raw materials, money, food, military clothing, meat, sheepskin, felt boots, fur-lined coats, and funding for several Soviet military units. Choibalsan and the newly elected Secretary-General of the MPRP Khorloogiin Choibalsan traveled to the front near Moscow to distribute gifts to Red Army troops. Stalin awarded Choibalsan the Order of Lenin for his outstanding effort in organizing Mongolian people for delivery of aid in goods to Red Army in July 1944. Internal developments. Despite the privations of wartime, Choibalsan and party leaders pressed on with what limited social progress they could manage while delivering much of the country's economic output to the Soviets. Choibalsan consistently sought Moscow's assent before making key policy decisions, even in minor matters, and made efforts to curry Moscow's favor whenever possible. At the 10th Party Congress in March to April 1940, Choibalsan arranged the purge of MPRP Secretary-General Basanjev and had him replaced with a new favorite of Stalin's, 24-year-old Minister of Finance Khorloogiin Choibalsan. Although he relinquished leadership of the MPRP, Choibalsan continued to be the predominant force in Mongolian politics and pushed through reforms of the Mongolian constitution more in line with the 1936 USSR constitution that effectively ended the influence and power of Buddhist Church. Between 1941 and 1946, the country adopted the Cyrillic alphabet in place of the traditional Mongolian script. On October 5, 1942, Choibalsan University in Ulaanbaatar opened, financed largely by the Soviets and with courses taught in Russian. Cult of personality. Building up Choibalsan's cult of personality became an important component of maintaining MPRP control over the country. Throughout the early 1940s, Choibalsan and party leaders, with help from the Soviets, launched a campaign to depict him as a national hero and savior of the nation, the Mongolian Stalin to Sukhbator's Lenin. Several historical films about the revolution were produced portraying Choibalsan as the leading hero or working side by side with Sukhbator. Official histories of the revolution were also rewritten to give Choibalsan a more central and heroic role. The university and the main industrial combine in Ulaanbaatar were named after him, as were the town and province of his birth. End of the war and pan-Mongolian aspirations. An ardent Mongolian nationalist, Choibalsan never gave up a hope of uniting all of the Mongols under the auspices of the Mongolian People's Republic. Until 1945 he had encouraged an ethnic insurgency in eastern Xinjiang, looking to strengthening the MPR's influence in the region and possibly beyond to Gansu and Qinghai. He saw the impending defeat of Japan as an opportunity to realize his long-held dream of a Great Mongolia, the uniting of Outer and Inner Mongolia, and he fully expected Stalin's backing as reward for Mongolia's steadfast support of the Soviets during the war. On August 10, 1945, Mongolia declared war on Japan 2 days after the Soviet Union and both armies joined forces to attack Japanese strongholds in northern China. during the Manchurian Strategic Offensive Operation. At the same time, Choibalsan unleashed a brief wave of pan-Mongolist nationalism through the press, calling for unification and encouraging a grassroots pan-Mongolist movement in Inner Mongolia. When Choibalsan ordered Mongolian troops to move south of the Great Wall as far as Zhangjiakou, Gendun, Badou, Khalga, he was ordered by an angry Stalin to call them back. Unbeknownst to Choibalsan, Stalin had already sacrificed the vision of a united Mongolia at the Yalta Conference in February 1945 in return for Soviet gains. Both Yalta and later the Sino-Soviet Treaty of 1945 forced China to abandon its claims to Mongolia and finally recognize it as an independent state within its existing borders. Conversely, it also marked Greater Mongolia's permanent division into an independent Mongolian People's Republic and a neighboring Inner Mongolia.